So the big upheavals in global markets have not been geopolitics, whether it's the Great Depression or the GFC of 2008-9. So they have come from elsewhere. Microsoft, Meta, Google, Nvidia, Amazon, Tesla, etc. That story had started unraveling in 2025 itself because 5 of those 7 stocks underperformed. Only Google and Nvidia outperformed it. And this year, if you see, now this is the interesting part which people are not looking at. I mean, even all these stories of what AI can do, look at who's telling you the stories. It is usually the companies who are looking for a fundraise or, investors. Vinod Khosla's saying that, everything, cost of all services will go to zero. You will get the poorest person can access a doctor at zero cost. So who's going to pay for the return on capital on this $1 trillion of capex? Either it's a private fundraise or it's an IPO. So they are all in the fundraising mode. So it is to their advantage to keep hyping up that, that you can walk on water and do everything. It would be about 70% equity in both India and global roughly, and about 15% each in fixed income and commodities. So bottom line is, be very conservative on your fixed income portfolio. For the extra 1% or 2% return, do not take extra risk.
Hello and welcome back to Mint's Guru Portfolio Series. Today I have none other than Devina Mehra, who's been a big proponent of global investing even before it started making noise in the markets. So let's find out how the run-ups in the US and other emerging markets have translated in her own portfolio. Hi Devina, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Devina, let's start today's conversation with global investing. How has your portfolio? I'm sure it's showing big double-digit returns in the last 1 year, given how the US markets and the other emerging markets have done.
Yes, first of all, in the last 1 year, I have not been overweight US. I have been underweight US. And invest across all geographies. So not just equity and all asset classes. So all countries, all asset classes where we invest. So that has actually done well. And well means I think we are up in dollar terms about 23-24%, and in rupee terms about 37% in the last 1 year. So
Right.
good going. Said this is not a risky portfolio. It is not weighted towards a single country or a single asset class. So I have kind of low yielding fixed income also in there, and in spite of that, this is the result. And
Right.
not better than all the Gift City products I saw. That's for sure.
Right. And which geographies look attractive to you right now?
So that keeps changing. So last year, if I look at 2025 beginning, we went underweight US, we went overweight Europe. China, we had been overweight since 2024. This year, when this is before the conflict started, in first rebalance this year, we further cut US and put it into commodities, in fact, oil and metals. So right now, of my global pie, US equities are less than 40%. I think it's 38.5 or something like that. The last countries we have added have been Mexico and Malaysia. So countries are probably not on the radar for a lot of people.
Right. So that's about global investing. Now, I want to understand your investment philosophy as a whole, seeing as what has happened in the Indian markets in the last 18 months. Has your investment philosophy changed?
Actually, investment philosophy is don't change that often and should not change that often. So very often people tell me that you repeat the same principles. I said that's because investing principles don't change. So I wrote a book last year, and the first 4 chapters are the basic ones where I talk about asset allocation. That get your asset allocation right, because that's 85-90% of your returns. And asset allocation is not asset allocation within India. It has to include all global assets. So global diversification is important. Risk management is key, because investing is a loser's game. So the first thing you have to ensure that is that you don't take a big hit on the capital. So those basic principles don't change. Have stop losses. Don't be too skewed towards a single sector or a single country or a single asset class. So that those principles don't really change.
Rightly said, Divina. And are there any changes you've made in your equity portfolio in the last 1 year since we spoke last as part of the series?
Yes, I mean, we actually look at, and I follow the same strategies that I offer to investors, whether it is in globally or in India. So I'm not managing my money any different way, barring a few legacy stocks that are left. So every quarter we look at everything from base zero, which is that if I had cash today, where will I be? So that's the question to ask, and that's the way to invest, because otherwise there is something called endowment bias that whatever you hold you will value more highly than you should. And to guard against that, this is one of the tricks, that don't look at what you hold, just start from zero. Of course, it's not as if the whole list changes every quarter. Usually 85 to 90% of the list remains the same, but that's a discipline.
Right. And there's also a lot of noise, especially, as we are seeing the rally driven by semiconductors and other sectors that are closely associated with AI. There's a lot of noise. Even in India, there's a lot of noise about how certain pockets are looking attractive now after the most recent correction. So, what are you consciously ignoring despite the noise, and why is that?
Okay, so two things I'll say. That one is that, of course, you spoke about some of the noise. The other noise is around geopolitics, right?
Yes,
So
that.
geopolitics is the noise that broadly most of the time we should ignore. And this I'm talking based on 125 years of data starting from the beginning of the 20th century. So including the two world wars and of course the two Gulf wars and Afghanistan and 9/11 and this and that. And every single big upheaval that you saw, it ultimately did not impact markets. The only exceptions are that in a major war, the country that is defeated, like in after the World War II, it was Germany and Japan, their stock market might be impacted. But if your country is not directly in the conflict, mostly you should ignore geopolitics. The sense 125 years of data, and it is not a statistical exercise, it is in every single case. So the big upheavals in global markets have not been geopolitics, whether it's the Great Depression or the GFC of 2008-9. So they have come from elsewhere. AI, people were still talking that India doesn't have an innovation story, India doesn't have an AI story. Now the AI story, up to 2024 and to an extent 2025, was what was called the Mag 7, the Magnificent Seven stocks in the US, which was all this Microsoft, Meta, Google, Nvidia, Amazon, Tesla, etc. Tesla, etc. But that story had started unraveling in 2025 itself, because five of those seven stocks underperformed. Only Google and Nvidia outperformed in. And this year, if you see, now this is the interesting part which people are not looking at. Yes, I mean, there's one part is the semiconductor rally, which I'll come to separately. But if you
Yeah.
look at US, even the Russell 2000, which is the small cap index, has given about 2.5 times the returns that S&P has. And every single sector in the Russell 2000 is positive. Obviously, starting with energy, the Exxons and Chevrons of the world have done well, but it is also everything else, Walmart and Costco and Johnson and Johnson and all these old economy companies are also doing very well, which people have forgotten about. And S&P is lagging because the Max 7 are lagging actually. Again, you have, at least three of them negative for the year, in spite of whatever returns have come. So, I mean, you have to look at things a little more in a granular fashion rather than just say that, this sector is good or that thing is good. And semiconductor and related, I mean, it's not just semiconductor, it's the entire hardware, electronics, right from SanDisk to Dell, and of course all the Microns and even Intel and the Korean and Taiwanese companies which have been running the whole stock market there, are all there. But then remember, semiconductor equipment is a highly cyclical industry, like most capital intensive industries. And this
That's
year, because the big AI players are putting in what are estimated to be maybe even around $1 trillion in capex, they don't not only have demand, they have pricing power. I mean, they just Micron, for instance, has been just revising its prices as it feels like. But who knows 2 years later whether this kind of investment will be going into AI. So that's always, as I said, a highly cyclical industry. So I'm a little wary of too much investment there. But even on a historical basis, this is the picture. Whereas the picture often I hear around from so-called, on the talking heads on television or wherever, is that it's a AI story, and people are still talking as if AI meant uh, the big players in AI, the eventual players, which is very different from what it actually is. So
That
always be very, very careful of the stories being told. I mean, even all these stories of what AI can do, look at who's telling you the stories. It is usually
yes,
the companies who are looking for a fundraise, or investors. Vinod Khosla's saying that, oh, I mean, the everything cost of all services will go to zero. You will get the poorest person can access a doctor at zero cost. So who's going to pay for the return on capital on this $1 trillion of capex? And you know that he's the early investor in OpenAI, where his $50 million are now well above, are into billions now, and as also some of the other AI players. In AI, there is no peer-reviewed research papers, nothing published in journals. So it is just someone selling you a hype.
that's right. And these companies also seem to be lining up for IPO listings, so that's there too.
Either it's a private fundraise or it's an IPO. So they are all in the fundraising mode. So it is to their advantage to keep hyping up that, that you can walk on water and do everything.
That's
On the other
like you
hand,
said.
I mean, recently the Uber CEO said that we tried AI and it doesn't seem to be giving us any economic returns.
That's true. A lot of the a lot of the CEOs have actually gone on record to say that the cost of AI is getting very difficult to justify all the money that we are spending on infrastructure and getting all these subscriptions. Yeah, rightly said, Devina. And you also mentioned that there's a lot of chatter how India is missing out on the AI innovation, journey. So, in the context of Indian equities, then which pockets are looking attractive to you right now, and where do you think the valuations are sane for investors to look at or for you to look at?
See, first of all, as I told you, even in the US, a lot of the old economy sectors are running now. So,
Correct.
that is what it is. I mean, our largest weight in equities in globally is industrials, actually. So, in India, I mean, whatever I say may not hold for a whole year. So, I have to put that caveat. As I said, we look at everything from base zero every year. So, last 2 years, we have been overweight auto components, auto and pharma, but I mean, I thought like 2 years have gone by, maybe those stories are getting over. But till now, all our systems are still showing that those sectors still look good. There's still new companies coming up in that. Of course, the bottom up stock picks in many areas. So from chemicals to FMCG, you will have stuff. There is in industrials and capital goods, machinery, again, we are seeing more companies coming up, and partly I think it is a power play. So it is both power companies as well as power equipment companies that are coming up a little more in our systems right now. So that's the broad pattern, but as I said, it may change.
Now, moving away from equities, in terms of debt investments, what is your underlying philosophy to invest in debt, and how do you invest in debt?
So first of all, I would like to say that you, as an investor, go into fixed income to reduce volatility and reduce risk. So I am totally against taking a risk on your debt or fixed income portfolio. So it is, that has to be managed very conservatively. If you want to take risk, then you may as well buy equity. I don't, for instance, in none of our products, whether there are Indian fixed income or multi-asset products or whether they're global products, we never buy single company bonds because I do not want to take a single company risk, because there
Right.
is then no filter, because if that company goes bust, if you have put 3% or 5% of your fund there, that's a straight write off. So I don't want that kind of risk. So normally we conservative in terms of credit. Globally we use systems again to see when how we should calibrate interest rate risk and credit risk. You have to look at both. I mean, many people just look at one and not look at the other. So you have to look at both. And I am therefore also quite anti things like private credit funds, which are being hawked now, because that to compound the fact that you are lending essentially to people or companies who cannot get money from banks. So it is inherently a more risky cohort. And then you have illiquidity. So even if the private credit fund is saying that they will provide liquidity, actually the assets are not liquid. So, it becomes like only if the new money is coming in, can they pay you off? And that is what happened in the West recently in private credit fund. So bottom line is be very conservative on your fixed income portfolio for the extra 1% or 2% return. Do not take extra risk.
So, if I have to ask about your portfolio, how do you take debt exposure? Is it through MFs? You said that you don't do bonds. So, or is it through fixed deposits? How is it?
So in terms of globally, we buy through ETFs or bonds, and there are many kinds of pools available. For example, there is an ETF that is all the government debt around the world. So it is a pool even of the government debt, and there are, of course, within there's investment grade, there's non-investment grade. Also, there are many categories like there are fallen angels, that companies which were earlier investment grade which have just fallen below, and so on. So we can do a mix and match in India. Mostly through gilt funds, government securities funds. Mostly that is where we, or other way, or now arbitrage funds, because again, the tax wise now in India, uh, there's a taxation differential between how different types of debt funds are taxed. So arbitrage funds become very attractive.
Right. And what is your view on alternate investments, especially when it comes to real estate, and what kind of exposure and strategy you follow?
I do not invest in real estate, never have. So I have only the one house in India uh, that I have never bought. Even in Dubai, I always rent it because I do not think real estate is a great investment. Mostly, I mean, everybody has the story of I had this uncle with land in Gurgaon or in Greater Noida, and this is how much he made. But most of real estate stories don't account for all the costs you bore in the interim, the number of years that went by, and also the illiquidity. In real estate, when you want to sell a property, even if you have a time frame of 6 months, it will be classified as a distress sale. So, other than the house you actually reside in, which is not a pure financial decision, I would say for most people, real estate investment does not make sense. If you look at the long term real estate index in India, that has compounded only 4-5%. So, it is not some great investment. So, it is, I would think, as an investment, it doesn't make too much sense. And the illiquidity, I mean, whatever newspapers tell you that this is the going rate in this area, I have yet to find anybody who's been able to sell an apartment at anywhere close to that rate. And as I said,
Right.
it takes a very long time to sell.
Right. That's right. Now, coming to gold, where does gold stand in your portfolio? What is your strategy with me? And have you changed your gold holdings in the last 12 to 18 months amidst the global uncertainty and the gold run up?
So gold and silver, we've always had allocation in our multi-asset funds in India and globally. And that investment was always has been in the single digits, gold and silver together. Of course, because of this price action in the last year and a half, that it has actually gone into double digits. So we are just debating whether to keep that or to trim that, because I think now it is something like in our India multi-asset portfolio, something like 14% in gold and silver together.
Right.
But I have never been a great gold bull. So if you look at my earlier year, 6 months ago, what I was saying, and the whole point is that in dollar terms, gold has been more volatile than equities. That's the data. So people said the gold has not seen such a rally since 1979. But if you go forward from 1979, 1980, gold made a high. But that high price was not crossed for 27 long years till 2007. And in between, even 19 years later, 1999, it was still down 60%. And this was not an aberration. After 2007, it made another peak, then it fell another 40%. So that's the nature of the beast. I mean, so in rupee terms, the gold chart looks good because it's a rupee depreciation chart. So our grandmothers
Right.
were right in buying gold because then you could not invest overseas. But now you don't need to do your entire currency hedging via gold. So, you have to look at other avenues also because gold is inherently very volatile.
You made an interesting point on currency hedging. So, how do you protect, insulate your portfolio and your expenses against currency depreciation?
You
What is
have to
your
invest
strategy?
overseas, which has been my mantra for years. As I told you, it's right there in my book in the first three, four chapters that you
That's
have to
right.
diversify. I mean, when I started working, I mean, this is an example I give that when I started working, the dollar was 12 rupees. So when you're talking of long-term planning for financial goals, which are 10, 20, 30 years away, you cannot forget that uh, the rupee depreciates. And the rupee dollar is not even capturing the whole depreciation. In 2025, for instance, dollar was a very weak currency. We depreciated against the dollar also, but against the euro, we depreciated 20% in a single year. So that's the
Right.
risk you're taking. And because, many of us grew up when you could not invest overseas, we are still not actively thinking of investing overseas. India is less than 3% of the world market cap as we speak. So there's absolutely no logical reason why 90% or 100% of your investment should be in India. So that's the thing. I mean, I went global in 1999 when nobody had dreamt of it. So, because it was so clear to me that to be have only a single a market risk is not advisable. I mean, that was a wake up call for me was the Asian crisis. So it showed me that, no matter how well the countries were growing in a year, you could have a crisis which wipes out most of your net worth. And
Okay.
so yeah, so 1999, we were not just the first Indian, we were the first Asian members of the London Stock Exchange, other than the Japanese, and a year later of the US broker dealer NAST. So, I mean, that you have to realize, I mean, I have been saying this for ages that you have to diversify globally. And now for 20 years, the liberalized remittance scheme has been there. LRS is pretty generous, $250,000 per person per year. A family of
Yes,
four can send out $1 million. That's very generous.
it is.
That's
That's true.
9.5 crore rupees as we speak.
So, Devina, we've spoken about individual assets in your portfolio. Now, why don't you give us a breakdown of your asset allocation between debt, equity, gold, and like real estate and alternate investment you've made clear that you don't invest in, and maybe even
Yeah,
cash if you're.
yeah. Leaving aside my home, which I'm not putting in this investment pie. Other than that, I have not invested in real estate. So I used to be mostly around 80-20 global and India. Now it is because of the price movement in the last 1 year where our Indian multi-asset portfolio, I think, is up some 5-6%. But in rupee terms, the global portfolio is up some 37%. I think it will more like now be 85-15. And in book portfolios currently, the debt will be about 13-15%, and commodities would be another 14-15%. So, as I said, commodities are relative, and commodities we even put even if you bought equity, if it is in like essentially a commodity company, we classify it as commodity. So if you buy a equity ETF, let us say of oil or mining companies, we classify it as commodities. So right now it would be about 70% equity, I mean, both India and global roughly, and about 15% each in fixed income and commodities.
Commodities. And like you said, that this is spread across India and global, with global being the heavier, that's where the heavier
Yes,
allocation is.
it would, I think, be around 85% now, as I said, because of the price action.
Right, got it. And would you like to give us a breakdown of your equity portfolio further? How much of it is in large, mid, and small caps?
Still, it would be skewed towards large cap. Actually, I mean, for risk management purposes, we we classify it little differently from the mutual fund classification, because see, now as per the mutual fund classification, the small cap cutoff is 35,000 crores of market cap, which is not very useful from risk management purposes, because to my mind, a 25 or 30 or 35,000 crore market cap company is not really, really small cap in the risk management sense. So we try to
Right.
limit our exposure in the below 5,000 crore market cap segment. So 1,000 crore and below, we don't look at. 1 to 5, we try to limit that to maybe, right now, I think it will be in single digits, maybe 6, 8%. And so large cap will still be the big one of over 50%. So maybe, last I saw
Yeah.
it was somewhere 60%. So the balance would be big cap.
Right. And can you give us an overview of how your equity portfolio performance looks of the last 1 year and say the last 5 years? Because, I'm sure that you would have, the global India allocation and even among the caps, you would have done a lot of changes. So if you could tell us last 1 year and last 5 years.
So last 1 year, India alone, or you're talking globally also? So see, I mean, as of now, we would, as I said, my portfolio will be up about 5% in India and about 37% globally. The 5 year numbers, I will check the exact numbers and tell you.
So now coming to ring fencing your investments against emergencies, how many months of expenses do you hold in your emergency fund?
So actually, I'm not holding much separately, because I invest only in liquid exchange traded securities. I do not invest. I mean, all our products, even our structured products globally, at the underlying stage, it is only liquid exchange traded securities. So everything can be liquidated in 2 trading days. So it's uh, not that difficult. So I don't need to hold cash. Cash. I mean, you can say, I mean, in a sense, arbitrage funds are as close to cash as you would get.
And what about your life and health insurance? What is the cover right now?
I do not have a cover other than, I think, whatever the corporate cover may be. But I have not taken separate health and life insurance.
Right. Now, looking back, you've been in the markets for so long. What is the one behavioral change you would say that has improved your investing outcomes?
Oh, you evolve. I mean, definitely. I mean, that's it. It will not just be one. It will be many, many on how you analyze companies, and all the nuances you add to your fundamental analysis. And for a long time, we did only fundamental analysis. Then you add some of the momentum parameters. Though I find that whatever you call it, technical analysis, momentum, etc. Even though we've done it for well over 2 decades. I find on their own it is very noisy, but it adds something to your fundamental analysis, just better timing your entry and exits. So that would be one area. And one of the other things which the last few years have kept me more occupied than just the numbers part is to understand all the ways your brain itself trips you up, all the inherent biases you have, all of that, uh, uh, you know the randomness in decision making. That is why over time we went to what we call a human plus machine system, which is that all your expertise you put into a system, and then the system applies it over the entire universe of stocks on a bias free, noise free basis. So that's kind of the ideal combination, that you have the human intelligence, but then when you're applying it, you are applying it uniformly, because even if you have 50 analysts, each analyst is not going to do the same thing in the same way. So you can have people with equal expertise, give them exactly the same data, and they will have different views. So that's the part. I mean, many things, like for example, uh,
Hmm.
what is a mistake? Now, this is an understanding that comes to you over a period of time, that the mistake is not a wrong outcome. The mistake
Right.
is a mistake of decision making process. When at times I made a lot of money, what I know is was a bad decision. It just turned out that it made you a lot of money, and it can be vice versa also, that you made the right decision. But life is a probability game, and sometimes the low probability outcome comes up. So I mean, the point is that you should not fool yourself. because we are
That's
all
right.
very prone to fooling ourselves. So those are understandings that come over a period of time. Even the asset allocation, I mean, this is not my discovery. It's there on first page of every investment book that 85 to 90% of your returns come from asset allocation, not from stock selection. But still, when you come into the market, you think you will be this person who will only, will be able to unearth the great multi-baggers. So,
That
that fact which is written in the book, you have to live through life to kind of it become real to you. So that is why you
that
see a lot of the great investors or even traders made most of their money after they were 50. So whether it is Jim Simons or George Soros or Warren Buffett, because you obviously need the data and the study, but you also need to have lived through a few cycles. You need to have some experience before all of those things actually become real to you and you are able to apply them.
that's right. Very rightly said. And any recent market conditions which might have changed your timelines or expectations, say your retirement or any other financial goals?
Not that. I mean, I would only say that in terms of the Indian market, remember that sentiment is a contraindicator. The very fact that only in the last 2, 3 months have I seen people talking and sort of listing out and enumerating the risks. Otherwise, everybody was selling the quote unquote India growth story. The fact that the sentiment is negative, research shows that normally when sentiment is negative and you're thinking, should I stop my SIP? Should I get out? The next period returns are above normal. When you need to be careful is when money making appears very easy, as it did in the first 8 months of 2024, that, literally anything you touch will run. That's when you need to be careful. So your brain is actually, screaming at the wrong time.
Now, talking about retirement, do you consider yourself financially independent and do you have a target corpus in mind for your retirement that you've achieved or are you on your way to achieving?
No, I have more than enough money for the rest of my life. So there's no target to be achieved on that front.
Right. Now, let's do a quick rapid fire. You can give quick takes on the questions that I'm going to ask. If the markets were to fall 10%, what would you do?
I'm already fully allocated on equity, so nothing very much changes.
And if they were to fall 20%, then what would you do?
Maybe a little bit more out of the precious metals into equities.
Right. If markets were to rally sharply, what will you do?
Stay put. I mean, that's what you are there for.
Right. If oil spikes further, how does it change your strategy?
Not very much. If you go back 2011, 12, for the better part of 3 years, oil was above $100. When we
Right.
have forgotten it.
Got it. And if
If
interest rates,
supply is interrupted big time, that really changes things a bit.
and how does that
If
change your
industries have to shut down because there's no supply or something like that, but I think we are over that kind of risk hump now.
right, right. And if interest rates were to go up, what will you do?
I'm not going to change things much, but US can't afford interest rates to go up too much. So let us see how it happens.
Right. What is the one signal that worries you today?
Um, I think it is more long-term macro that we are letting our demographic dividend kind of drift away by not being able to find employment for our young people.
Right. And what is the one signal that gives you confidence?
Ultimately, I mean, it is all a cycle. When you look back, you see the ups and downs. When you're living through them, it appears difficult, but you have to live through them. That's the nature of equity markets.
So, for the last question, what are you most bullish on for the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, that is something I never, I do not have high conviction bets
Right.
deliberately. systematically, because higher conviction bet is what you are marrying a stock or a story, and that is what I'm trying to guard against. That go by the data and facts which change, and no
Right.
one has a crystal ball for like 5 years, 10 years. So anyone who's telling you that is fooling you.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this year's Guru Portfolio Chat. Thanks a lot, Devina, for joining us today.
Thank
This has
you.
been very insightful, and I'm sure our listeners will get a lot of takeaways from this conversation today.
Thank you.